Test, test. You're welcome to come forward and light a silent candle of joy or sorrow at this time if you desire.
Good morning. I'm David Fields. I'm going to be your chalice lighter. I had the good fortune of meeting Reverend Breedon and his wife Teresa last night. I'm just going to light this candle. I'm sure just like the candle, his talk is going to be illuminating. So welcome.
Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church. I'm Linda Miller, and I'm a member of the Wolfson Lecture Committee. And we're delighted that you're joining us for the 10th Annual Humanist Sunday, Wolfson Award and lecture as we begin. I invite you to sign your name on the attendance clipboards, which are going to be circulated. You're not obligated to sign in, but it is appreciated and is only used for church purposes. In the foyer, there are listening devices, large print orders of service, and hymnals for those who may wish to use them. And I invite you now to turn off your personal technology into worship mode. Following the service, please join us in the fellowship hall, down the hall here, for our special buffet luncheon featuring Middle East goodies. Please note the announcements contained in your bulletin insert. And now for the opening hymn.
Would you please rise and join together in body or spirit our opening hymn number 331 found in your gray hymnals.
Life is the greatest gift of all the riches on this earth. Life and its creatures, great and small, of high and lowly birth. So treasure it and measure it with deeds of shining worth. Mind is the brightest gift of all, its thought no barrier knows. It seeks creation's hidden plan, its quest surmounts all bars. It rains the wind, it chains the storm, it weighs the outmost stars. We are of life, its shining gift, the measure of all things. Up from the dust our temples lift, our vision soars on wings. For seed and root, for flower and fruit, our grateful spirit sings.
Please be seated.
So I read this at home last night, and I decided that I had a choice to make. I was either going to change the words a little bit, or I was going to make a comment before I read it. So I'm going to make a comment. Walt Whitman was born in 1819, and it's quite a gap between then and now. And during all that time, we have evolved quite a bit. We have more words, we have more medical words and more understanding of the medical situations with the brain. And we have evolved quite a bit in regard to gender bias. So with that understood, and going through the reading and understanding that Walt Whitman was a man of his time, I had a feeling that he really was a good guy, that that what he said was something that was in his heart, and so we are not to take anything lightly about it or be angry or whatever. So here's the comment, here's the piece. This is what you shall do. Love the earth and sun and the animals. Despise riches. Give alms to everyone that asks. Stand up for the stupid and crazy. Devote your income and labor to others. Hate tyrants. Argue not concerning God. Have patience and indulgence toward the people. Take off your hat to nothing, known or unknown, or to any man or number of men. Go freely with powerful, uneducated persons, and with the young, and with the mothers of families. Read these leaves in the open air, every season of every year of your life. Re-examine all you have been told at school or church or in any book. Dismiss whatever insults your own soul, and your very flesh shall be a great poem.
Good morning. Would you like to hear some good news? Yes. Excellent. Well, the good news is that we are here for the 10th annual Wolfson Award and Lecture, and I'm so honored to have my colleague and friend, Dr. David Breedon, and his wife, Teresa, here with us this morning. We had a marvelous opportunity to sup with them last night, and David and I sat across from each other in the middle of the table, and as long as people tolerated the fact that we got into shop talk, it was good. It was good. The other good news for me is we had our monthly distribution for our food pantry yesterday. We saw 75 families through our food pantry. Again, about 8 different languages spoken throughout the morning, and dozens of volunteers that were here to make certain that no one went hungry this month. It will continue. We suspect that our November distribution in preparation for the holidays will be substantively more, and the opportunity during our November distribution, I think, will be to move back into the building so that people will be able to shop for themselves, which gives them a bit more agency in terms of the foods that they desire to eat. And so I'm honored to have witnessed this, but more so to have worked with so many people making this happen, and so many people that we get to touch on a monthly basis. I get to go car to car and just look at people and say, how are you? How are things in your home? I ran out of business cards because the needs are great. And so thank you for that. As for the offertory this morning, I was reminded watching a video, I'll be right with you, that we often use the phrase, I have to, right? I have to go to work. I have to go to church. I have to participate in the offertory. If we made one simple change, and every time we use the phrase have to, instead said, I get to, what would it mean? It would mean that we turned this opportunity for ourselves. If there are other children, youth here that are going to religious exploration, please, you can come forward now. They get to go to religious exploration, right? Which means that it's part of the privilege of having the ability to participate, whether it is by means of the financial capacity we have, whether it is by means of the physical capacity we have, but getting to put forward the fact that we are in so many ways a privileged people, and we get to apply ourselves in ways that make a difference, not only in our own lives, but in the lives of those we journey with. And so it is in honor of that privilege, and in honor of the mission and ministries of this congregation, that when we gather for worship, we take up an offering, an opportunity for each of us to contribute something that is representative of our own efforts in service to the larger whole. And so we get to take up an offering. We get to participate in one. And for that privilege, we are so very pleased this day, this time our morning offering, will be received.
Before I move on to my goal here, I'm going to add a goal. I want to acknowledge our substitute pianist today, Ali Cody, who's providing coverage on the keyboard, and a good heart to our congregation today. I have the privilege of introducing the award this morning. The Dr. Irving and Annabelle Wolfson Lecture was endowed and began in 2012. You'll note the 10-year anniversary, well, there was that pandemic thing, so we won't go there. Math doesn't always work. It began following the death of Irving, who had been a longtime member of this congregation and in whose estate funds were set aside for this particular event. In establishing this lecture, his will includes the following. The term liberal religion shall be defined as religion based solely on reason and independent of supernatural revelation and tradition, and which religion advocates justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Some portion of each annual lecture should be devoted to the following question. Irving Wolfson and Annabelle Wolfson were agnostics who tried to live by the highest moral standards. From where does the motivation come to live by such standards to a person who did not believe in a hereafter of rewards and punishments? In continuing to honor the Wolfsons through this special service and reception, the Wolfson Lecture Committee also established an annual award in honor of the Wolfsons and in celebration of the recipients' contributions to humanist causes. This year, we are truly delighted to honor Dr. David Breedon, not the first time anybody's ever mispronounced the name. Yeah, right. So we really actually are honored to honor Dr. Breedon. He has a master's in fine arts in poetry from the Iowa Writers Workshop and a PhD from the Center for Writers at the University of Southern Mississippi, with additional study in writing and Buddhism at Naropa University in Boulder, Colorado. He also has a Master of Divinity degree from Meadville Lombard Theological School in Chicago and recently retired as Senior Minister at First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis. Dr. Breedon is an associate member of the Institute for American Religious and Philosophical Thought and chairs the Education Committee of the American Humanist Association. He serves as an adjunct faculty at United Theological School of St. Paul, Minnesota, teaching in the Humanist track. He is the recipient of the Korean Arisian Award for significant contributions to humanism from the Unitarian Universalist Humanist Association and is also the recipient of the American Humanist Association Distinguished Service Award 2023. He gave the 22-23 Men's Lectures, Resistance at the Margins, Pentecostalism, Unitarian Universalism, and Intimations of Liberation. Religious naturalist Ursula Goodenough says of his most recent book, "Radical Noticing is a wonderful title for this collection of the acuity that inhibits the mind and heart of David Breedon. He takes you there, and then there, fully embodied and mortal and insistent, and the fogs drift away." The title of Dr. Breedon's lecture today is Tending the Fire, Unitarian Universalist Humanism and Religious Neutrality, of which he writes, "I have been cogitating about the traditional place of liberal religion as a third way between more dogmatic traditions and secularism. At one time, liberal Protestantism was the third way. However, has the quick rise of the spiritual but not religious changed this social dynamic? Are there perhaps four ways now, with UUism constituting a fourth way that embraces both various forms of liberal religion, now including paganism, Buddhism, etc., and also humanism? If this is the case, might religious humanism, which I term congregational humanism, and consider religion neutral, serve as a way of making UU congregations more inviting to people following and or exploring many eclectic ways to be religious, spiritual in the United States today? Friends, on behalf of the Wolfson Lecture Committee, it is my honor to present the 2024 Dr. Irving and Annabelle Wolfson Award to the Reverend Dr. David Breedon.
I realized as I was looking at the list of award winners that I know them all. And Bill Murray has unfortunately passed on now, one of the great humanist UU ministers. And so I am so very, very pleased to be among that list of people. It's truly, truly an honor. And I definitely want to thank everyone on the committee. Thank you so much. It was great talking with you last night and then meeting friendly faces this morning instead of just people I don't know. So my wife and I thank you so much for inviting us and being so welcome. How is I project a lot anyway, so it sounds okay? Okay, good. Not long ago, I was at First Church in Boston during the men's lectures. And as you probably know, that was a UU church established back in 1630. A while ago, as soon as John Winthrop and his companions got off the boat, the first thing they did was found a congregation. And they promised this: "We solemnly and religiously promise and bind ourselves to walk in all our ways in mutual love and respect each to the other." I don't see anything better than that, do you? Now, we know they also had a few other ideas that we might not agree with, but one thing they did that might be good is they were able to fine everyone in town who didn't come into church on Sunday morning. So they made a little extra money by arresting and fining people who didn't go. I don't think that would go over too well these days. But you know, when those Calvinist Puritans founded Harvard College in order to train young ministers, they came up with the motto Veritas, truth in Latin. And their assumption was the assumption of John Calvin: everything possible to be discovered would underline the verity, the truth of Calvinism. It didn't work out that way, unfortunately for them, but maybe it did work out. Maybe we really are getting closer to the truth. It just doesn't happen to be Calvinism. John Winthrop's statue stands outside the door at First Church in Boston. But if he were to go in this morning, he would get a bit of a shock to his system, I think. Ours is a living tradition. We evolve over time. And one of the things I think we can hold on to is that good advice from Walt Whitman. Thanks for reading that this morning. Re-examine all you've been told at school or church or in any book. Dismiss whatever insults your own soul, and your very flesh will become a great poem. So that's Whitman's promise to you. And yeah, it's a little old and sexist, but good old Walt believed desperately in transcendentalism and in our living tradition. We must remind ourselves the professors at Harvard weren't Puritans one day and scientific materialists the next. The change, the evolution is very slow, and it hasn't even been all that disjunctive. It's just been an interesting, odd evolution over time. And that's what I want to talk about. It's our living tradition that we still inhabit today, where it's been, where it is, and maybe where it's going. Now, historically, universalism produced the Christian pacifism of Aidan Ballou. Some of you have been to Hopedale, I assume, and you may also know that it inspired Leo Tolstoy in his Christian pacifism, and also Gandhi later on. And the other thing universalism has to contribute to the American psyche is that heretical abomination of universal salvation. What an idea. And at one time it was an abomination, but now almost all mainstream Protestant churches believe in it, at least tacitly or de facto, because hell is just not all that popular anymore. Far more Americans believe in heaven than in hell. As an old Pentecostal, that's a little odd to me. It's supposed to be a balance, but there you go. And Universalism gave that to the United States psyche. Now, Unitarianism has produced, I think, three major offshoots that now exist outside of our tradition. One is Transcendentalism and its many offshoots. A lot of it New Age, but there you go. Also, nonviolent social protest, Henry David Thoreau. That is our idea. And humanism in its contemporary American incarnation comes directly out of Unitarianism. Paradoxically, the commitment to social justice in the late 19th century led both Universalists and Unitarians into what is called the social gospel movement that you may have read about. In the movement, we were joined by all sorts of liberal Protestants, American Baptists, Methodists, Presbyterians, Congregationalists, Episcopalians, and on. These became what is called the mainline Protestant churches. The mainline Protestant churches. The term mainline came from the idea that when you rode the train into town in the early 20th century, those big, huge, beautiful churches on the main line were Protestant. And it was the age of Protestantism. Nowadays, unfortunately, we call them the former mainline in the studies of what has happened in American religion. The number of Americans attending mainline denominations has fallen drastically, both in numbers and especially in the percentage of the American population. Most of those huge buildings today contain graying people, huge buildings, and falling revenue so that they can't figure out how to even pay for those great buildings from the 19th century. I hasten to add, though, Unitarian Universalism has lost a smaller percentage of people than have the other mainline congregations, although in terms of statistics, we are lumped in with the other liberal religions of Protestantism. Nowadays, fewer and fewer people even know the theological difference between any of the main line. Do you know the difference between a Lutheran and a Presbyterian? Most people nowadays don't, and what's more, which is sad for us theologians, they don't care, right? Who has the best sand volleyball court and that kind of thing often chooses nowadays which church people go to. Now, presently, we are engaged, if you haven't noticed, in a close election in this nation. We feature one presidential candidate who grew up in New York City in the Norman Vincent Peale Dutch Reformed Church, which was teaching the power of positive thinking. And most people don't notice that about Mr. Trump, but he was taught the power of positive thinking. So when he says his attendees are huge, he is manifesting this truth. Just saying, because he grew up with Norman Vincent Peale. The other presidential candidate is a Black Baptist and a Hindu from those traditions, which I think much more reflects how America is going today. Also, one vice presidential candidate belongs to the liberal Lutheran denomination that is shrinking so fast, the Lutherans are predicting their own demise by 2050. Now, 2050 is an important number when you start looking at the falling off of church attendance. Why? Because old boomers like me won't be going to church in 2050. It's very unlikely anyway. We won't be tottering in. So what happens to Protestantism after 2050? And this is something that is very much in the minds of all denominational leaders. Now, the other vice presidential candidate has converted to a very conservative form of Roman Catholicism. So we have a religious difference in the basic ideas for our election. I know which of the two most Unitarian Universalists would like to see elected. I grew up Pentecostal myself, and I grew up on a farm. I still own the family farm in the Ohio River Valley. Whence comes the charismatic and conservative religious impulses that now have spread across the U.S. as fundamentalism and as evangelicalism? Many fundamentalist and charismatic Christians, and they're not always the same, we do tend to lump them together, but they're not the same. Many fundamentalist and charismatic Christians actually believe the dogmas in their faith tradition. This is sometimes surprising to Unitarian Universalists that they really believe in those dogmas. And they will vote according to their belief system, even to their own detriment and self-interest. The equation is simple for them: suffer in this vale of tears and get rewarded in the next one. As you know, our tradition long ago said, we don't think that's happening. What they see as putting virtue before personal gain is admirable, I think we will all say, except for what we see as the content of it, which we don't agree with. The most important and lasting thing I learned from my uneducated farmer parents is that your religion is the most important thing in your life. They taught that, and I still believe it. I just happen to have changed my religious bent after I went away to college, which happens a lot, may have happened to some of you in this room. Why is liberal Protestantism shrinking so fast? Why? The first reason is purely sociological. Protestantism became such a force in the United States that liberal Protestant values are now embedded in our liberal thinking. The Democratic Party platform matches exactly what those old social gospel mainline churches were trying to get the government to agree with all those years ago. But among all Protestants, 38% lean Democratic and 59% lean Republican. And this is important to remember. Among the numbers, in those numbers, nothing in particular, the nuns, nothing in particular to describe their religious preference. 62% of those people lean Democratic, while 34% lean Republican. So it's exactly the opposite of the regular Protestant things. So the bottom line here is that religious preference and political preference go hand in hand nowadays. As a matter of fact, almost everyone who studies these statistics are actually talking about politics, not theology. Again, sad for us in the theological business, but very much an aspect of American life today. White Protestants lean Republican by large percentages. Black Protestants lean Democratic by even larger percentages. But before we get bogged down in numbers and abstractions, I would like to tell you a little story about our living tradition. Because what I really want to convince you of today is we need to survive. And I hope that you will leave the building today believing that our tradition needs to survive. We just have to figure out how to make that happen. I want to talk about a book called An Emancipation of the Mind. If you like reading, especially history, you got to read this book, An Emancipation of the Mind. Radical Philosophy, the War over Slavery, and the Refounding of America by the author Matthew Stewart, okay? I'm a history buff and also a UU history buff, so this book was right down my alley, although again, this guy is one of those nuns over there. The book starts with the question, why did Frederick Douglass keep a bust in his study of an old 19th century German philosopher, a white guy? The bust is sitting on a shelf right behind Frederick Douglass's writing desk. You can go see that at his national monument today. Why was that guy from Germany so important to Frederick Douglass, and who was he? Now, Frederick Douglass has one of my favorite statements about religion ever. He said, "I bow to no priests either of faith or, faith or unfaith. Faith or unfaith. I claim, as against all sorts of people, simply perfect freedom of thought. That's our tradition. Now, who was this old white guy from Germany? Ludwig Feuerbach. Ludwig Feuerbach, I know, yeah, it's even hard to spell, who lived from 1804 to 1872, and he gets my vote for creating the humanism that in its contemporary form. We know humanism has been out there for 5,000 years among skeptical people, but in the US tradition, Ludwig Feuerbach is really the founder of the way we operate. Now, how come a German speaker from the 18th and 19th centuries is the Anglophone spokesperson for our humanist tradition? Kind of odd, isn't it? Well, his seminal work was called The Essence of Christianity. The Essence of Christianity, 1841. Feuerbach argued that the God of traditional Christianity is a projection of human aspirations and desires. Now, this is before Freud was even born, right? But that the God of traditional Christianity is a projection of human aspirations and desires, and the famous formula, very easy to remember, theology is anthropology. Theology is anthropology. Theology is about what we human beings need and want. The humanist good news that Feuerbach proclaimed is humanity has created the gods and the scriptures in our own image, which is a product of our hopes and our fears and our desires. Now, this news was translated into the English language in 1854 and appeared here in the United States, thanks to the translation of a British Unitarian freethinker by the name of George Eliot, who you may know as a Victorian novelist. Actual name Mary Ann Evans. And it came out here at a time when the abolition movement had kind of crashed in the US in the early 1850s. The idea was radical then, as anthropology and theology are the same, even more than maybe it is now. It's according to who you're talking to. It challenged the very foundations of religious tradition. Feuerbach suggested that by understanding our projection onto this God idea, we humans can reclaim our own potential. All we have to do is look at what we think of as God, and that's what you actually are looking for in yourself and in religious community, human experience, and how do we exist? How do we go on? Now, therein lies the saga of the book I was telling you about, as the author explores the theological and philosophical underpinnings of both pro-slavery and abolitionist movements in the years leading up to the American Civil War. Unsurprisingly, the apologists for slavery depended on fundamentalist, traditional Christian values. A reminder for those who haven't read the Bible lately, the Bible clearly condones slavery. I mean, it even tells you how to sell your daughter into slavery, right? The Bible clearly condones slavery. Therefore, for Bible-believing 19th century Americans, slavery was A-okay. And almost every church preached slavery was A-okay from the pulpit. That nation under God was a slave republic, biblical at the time. In a nation enthralled by the gospel according to people like Jonathan Edwards and his preachings of hell, he was a slaveholder as well. We forget those kinds of things. The abolition movement in the US had stalled. Christians in the UK, in the Anglican tradition, had already outlawed slavery. But here and abolitionists thought they would simply come over here and do the same thing. Didn't work with the Christians in the United States because the Bible says it's A-okay. Dead stop. except for Feuerbach. What about the intuition that some people had that there was a higher law than the Bible and therefore the God of the Christians? There was no way around the Bible. If you were Christian, you needed to believe in it. But some people had this idea of a higher law, a moral law derived from other means than their Christian faith. How could you do that? And therefore, how could you restart the abolition movement? It was scandalous to ask, but might we human beings have evolved a higher morality than the one reflected in the Bible? That was Feuerbach's question. Some of us realize slavery is a bad idea. The preaching of radical Unitarian minister, transcendentalist, abolitionist, and reader of Feuerbach, Theodore Parker, who I hope you've heard of, attracted the attention of both Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln. I'd known about Douglass, I had not known about Abraham Lincoln until I read this book. So, for example, when Abraham Lincoln was on that train to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, trying to figure out how to write a little speech for the graves there, he stole something from Theodore Parker. Government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Straight out of a sermon by Theodore Parker. In another speech, Lincoln talked about a house divided against itself. Now, that is biblical, but he got it from Theodore Parker. And though Lincoln never used the phrase, we all know that Parker's most famous phrase is the arc of the moral universe, appropriated by Martin Luther King and by President Obama. Now, in addition, when the German political activist Adelie Ossing, who was kicked out of the German states in 1848 for her leftist political bent, she came to the US, and as soon as she got on the ground here, she went looking for Frederick Douglass. Right, so a German political activist goes looking for an American political activist, Frederick Douglass. She translated Feuerbach and other German radicals for Frederick Douglass, and she also helped him learn the German language so he could do it himself. Again, one of those lost little keys to things that how did this happen? A new sort of abolitionism was born, drawing from the 19th century German philosophers, the radical Enlightenment, as we call it, emphasizing rationalism, idealism, and atheism in their fight against slavery. That's the tie-in to what the Wolfsons were thinking. Abolitionists started talking about a higher law, a more overarching moral law, and people began to listen. Now, that's just one example of the amazing story of what Unitarian Universalism has given to this nation. After the Revolution and the Constitution, no, we aren't, a nation invented for Christianity, but the nation began to revolve back to Christianity after that, up until the Civil War period. And so we were the ones who were standing up against that in our living tradition. But let's go back to some numbers. The Public Religion Institute, Research Institute, PRRI, usually has the best numbers for what's going on in religion in the United States. Now, I've already shared the fact that among all Protestants, 38% lean Democratic, 59% toward the Republican parties. Among those that chose nothing in particular, the nuns, to describe their religious preferences, as I mentioned, 62% lean Democratic, 34% lean Republican, almost exactly the opposite. But notice that those numbers are more representative of UUs. Where are we politically? Well, we're with the atheists and agnostics and the nuns. It's something to reflect on that our political and social justice commitments are much closer to those people who have left church, but are still somehow Protestant. U.S. population in 2020, that's the last time we got full numbers, was 336 million Americans, adults. White Christians made up 44% of the U.S. population as of 2020. White Christians, 44% of the U.S. population. White mainline Protestants made up only 16%. The rest are over there. Black Protestants made up 7% of the population, Hispanic Protestants 4%. Religiously unaffiliated Americans make up 23% of the U.S. population now. We are the third largest religious group in the nation. Protestants, Roman Catholics, none. Or whatever we are. So that is the thing to think about here, is that where is the middle way? Well, the middle way has moved way over to that place of atheists, agnostics, or people who just kind of vaguely are religious but don't go to church anymore for the most part, which I think goes a long way toward answering the question, where did all those liberal mainline Protestants go? They didn't become evangelicals. They didn't become Pentecostals. Where did they go? Well, they stay home on Sunday morning. They simply don't go to church anymore. They are liberal. They are social justice oriented. They have their political commitments much as we do, but they have now moved over to this other side, a middle way. Now, I agree that the actual U.S. political divide, oddly enough, is now tracked by, again, not theology, but politics. And as I mentioned, we, in our tradition, have invented many of those ways that people stay away from church nowadays, right? Now, why was Ludwig Feuerbach's news so liberating for George Eliot, a British Unitarian freethinker? Well, we know why. She was a brilliant human being who was forced to be a second-class citizen because of the Christian morals of Victorian England. That's why, and that's why Feuerbach meant so much to her. Why did Parker, why did Frederick Douglass, why did Abraham Lincoln key in to Feuerbach's ideas? Because they spoke of a higher moral law, and all of those people knew that slavery was absolutely wrong. Right? Feuerbach's humanism was rooted in the belief that we humans are capable of shaping our own destinies, independent of divine or priestly intervention. I mean, remember back, you don't remember, none of us do, but when Martin Luther started nailing things to the church doors, he was talking about a personal relationship with God that the Roman Catholic Church did not allow any longer. He wanted to get back to that, and the way he got there was by translating the Bible into colloquial German so that theoretically everyone could read it, and therefore make their own determinations without a priest, right? It's called the priesthood and the prophethood of all believers. That's central to what we do. It's always been central to Unitarian Universalism, and it was central to the Lutheran movement of the time. I don't need a crystal ball to predict that in years to come, denominational structures, given the present direction, and there's no indication they're going to back up, falling revenues, falling down buildings, increasing back office costs. Who's going to do your finances, right? Who's going to figure out your insurance for the building and that kind of thing? We have to pay so more and more is going to the back office instead of to the preaching staff. And that's inevitable in the situation that's happening. More regulations all the time, more back office people. I had 2 full-time people on my staff who had nothing to do whatsoever with the Sunday morning service, just to keep the building up, right? And just to keep the rentals going. Central to Martin Luther's idea is that personal relationship, and there is no veil between you, the believer, and God. Or, Feuerbach could say, you, the believer, and nature and your understandings of this higher power that's out there, if you want to say there is such a thing. So what I really want to say to you today, and I hope you hear it, is that you have a higher calling in our liberal religious tradition. We're still here. You're in the building today. I believe this is the way to communicate true moral integrity and to support each other. Reading books, discussion groups, sharing circles. Because what is America suffering from? A loneliness epidemic. Your calling is to treasure our living tradition. We helped free slaves. We helped destroy that institution, and yes, the state of Massachusetts and Ohio sacrificed the most human beings to that cause in terms of death. Your calling is to treasure that living tradition. We have stories of liberation. You may have seen the new flower that the UUA has come out with about our tradition and, you know, its interdependence, right? The center of that is what? Love. You know who first said that? Feuerbach. So we got there just 150 years later, but our living tradition is going in that particular way. We're born flesh. Flesh has needs. Flesh is situated in relationships, relationality, family, presumed race, physical ability, biological gender, social class, religion, or the lack of thereof. We're born into this whole matrix of stuff. And it can become a prison. Or you can declare your own liberalism. We as individuals and as communities make the positive choice to live into a higher calling by meeting and talking together. I'm going to leave you with this thought. Many of you maybe have read the book, Rick Rubin's book, A Creative Act, The Way of Being. It's an amazing book for anybody who's interested in creative writing at all. Rick Rubin is a record producer. He's also sort of a lightweight Buddhist, but basically a secular guy. But it's an absolute brilliant book. And he says this: our work embodies a higher purpose. Whether we know it or not, we're a conduit to the universe. Material is allowed through us. If we are a clear channel, our intentions reflect the intentions of the cosmos. Now, how transcendental is that? Emerson would have jumped up for joy. Thoreau would have jumped up and, that's the way, that's the perfect. So, may we be good stewards of this higher purpose. May we be a conduit for that material of the universe. May we reflect the intentions of the cosmos. And may we keep our wondrous living tradition alive. Thank you.
I want to thank you for that lightweight Buddhist comment. As a heavyweight Unitarian Universalist, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So, we have a couple of minutes here for anyone who would like to ask a question or to make a comment, and I will bring the microphone to you if you so desire.
Right over here.
Oh.
The nuns that you mentioned, are they the same NONES that is mostly youth as opposed?
Well, I mean, the numbers skew toward youth, yes. And that appears to be a reflection of a distrust of basic institutions. I mean, those of us who remember the Great Society, remember back in the 60s, we remember when America tried to do what we say we are. But, my kids in their 30s, they've never seen an America that really tried to achieve social justice, really tried to destroy poverty. So we old folks have a different vision than younger people do, and we trust institutions more. And that's one of the things that we have to keep an eye on in terms of the decay of liberal religion.
Anyone else? Really?
Well, I'm very glad to do any, just sidle up to me in the hall over there, and I'll be glad to.
We can do that. One,
Yep, Matthew Stewart, Stewrt.
So-
I can send the PDF of my talk. So
excellent. Your Feuerbach's understanding of the projection of Jack Miles years ago in his book, A God, a Biography, opens that book by talking about humanism tangentially by saying we have to, for years philosophers, Feuerbach, saying, God is simply a projection of all that human beings want and desire. He said we have to accept as kind of an empirical reality that for many people it's not a matter of projection, but introjection.
yes.
Into ourselves.
Yes, yeah. Well, and the tradition for Feuerbach begins with Immanuel Kant, who no one wants to hear about because Immanuel Kant is boring. But what?
They're used to boring here. It's okay. Sorry.
But Kant is the higher moral law guy, and he is trying to lay out how and this is 1790s, how human beings can have morality. And he tried to save God, but the fact is that if you're really talking sense and proving and all of that, you can't. So he started to back away. He actually got in trouble for that, and the king said, Kant, never write about religion again, and he didn't. But he proved essentially for the Romantic era, for Emerson, Thoreau, etc. He proved that God was not required for human morality. As a matter of fact, it probably gets in the way with the Bible and all that stuff. Also, when you were mentioning right before I came up, Kant argued that if you do a good deed just for a reward, just because you're afraid, just because you want to go to heaven, that is not a free action. You are not a free agent in doing that. You must do right because it's the right thing to do, not because you're expecting a reward or a punishment.
Excellent. Has that?
Thank you for your talk, very enlightening. Your title mentioned the concept of religious neutrality.
Yes.
I wonder, you haven't really spelled that out. Could you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I started skipping because I didn't want to run over. Yes.
That never happens here.
All right. Yeah. Well, yes. I come from a Pentecostal tradition, so we go forever. But the idea of religious neutrality goes to Whitman, argue not concerning God. We get so bound up in arguing about whether there's a God or not, whether there's anything spiritual out there that's non-material. We don't need to talk about that stuff. The Buddha said, if you get hit by an arrow, you don't say, who made that arrow? You just say, oh my God, get me to a doctor. So he said, Buddha said, and also my predecessor, John Dietrich, who helped form humanism and Unitarianism. God's fun to talk about, but we have so many problems. Let's fix those problems, then we'll sit down and talk about God. But if you believe that human beings can change things on this planet, which my parents didn't, right? Pentecostal, this is the veil of tears. This is the domain of Satan, right? If you believe in human agency, that we can fix the homeless problem or the food inequalities, if you believe that, you're one of us, right? And the people in liberal Protestantism all thought that and agree with us, but they've now exited the building in huge numbers. So they're voting the same way we vote, right? And so I see that third rail, that third group, as the people we can communicate with. The nuns, the religiously unaffiliated, because most of them aren't really, right? You know, they read their daily something, you know, a Buddhist text of the day or something like that. You know, I'll pick on my wife. My wife is a Unitarian Universalist humanist. She also is a practicing yogi, right, in the Hindu tradition. I'm a practicing Stoic. So, you know, and this more closely matches America and lightweight Buddhism, right? This more closely matches the religious beliefs in America than, say, the Presbyterians. But you know what the mainline Protestants are going to do as they shrink? They're going to get further and further away from all of their theological baggage, right? I mean, what Presbyterian is going to talk about predestination and Calvinism? Because that's not popular these days. So they're going to keep eliding the Protestantism until it becomes a milquetoast sort of thing, so that anyone who walks in the building will be fine with it. We can't do that. We shouldn't do that, I should say. We need to stick with our social justice commitments, because that's what we are, right? The reason the Universalists and the Unitarians got together, because they were always meeting on the same picket lines in the 19th century, right? So it made perfect sense, right?
John.
So I want to ask, given what you just said and what you were referencing earlier about the numbers of people leaving liberal theological traditions, and specifically about UUs, while we've lost two, but not as fast, I'm curious as to what you think is, or what lessons we could learn of how we could stop that ebb and actually grow, given that we have, as you seem to be intimating, a destination for people who can avoid that loneliness epidemic that is out there.
Right.
That we have something to sell that no one else does, and it really should connect with a whole huge host of people that have left their own tradition.
Well, and it does. We just simply need to get the word out better. But the average American on the left of center, agrees with us. Maybe they are believers in a particular kind of God, but it's not a God with a white beard, you know, on a throne somewhere. So argue not concerning God, Walt Whitman says. There's a good reason not to argue not concerning God, because every one of us has some kind of traditional thing. You know, one of my assistant ministers was a UU and then sort of a humanist, but he was an absolute atheist. He just, you know, I'm not. I'm an agnostic because I don't believe that in evolution, how did we, human beings who developed on the savannas of Africa, why would we have any connection or ability to figure out what's out there? We can't see microwaves, right? We can only see a narrow band for what we, you know, so that we can survive and hunt. So I'm an agnostic. And again, I love reading about the various gods. It's just that we aren't the Roman Catholic God. You know, we don't do that. But so argue not concerning God, I say. And I'm not one of those humanists who thinks that we can't talk about it. And when we embrace all these, you know, Kenneth Patton, the Charles Street Meeting House in Boston back in the day, you know, this was universalism at its core, and I would say its best moment. Actually, a lot of universalists have backed away from this now, and they're trying, you know, they're kind of rediscovering Christianity. That's fine, but the expansion, we humanists say this is all human. Human beings wrote all those scriptures. Human beings thought up all those things, those rituals, because it met human needs, in particular social circumstances. That's the difference. The human religious impulse, it's the same for all of us. Right? And we can meet more needs because of our tradition than can the Presbyterians, I think. And I hope, because literally, I mean, the Lutheran ELCA, that's the Walls one, the liberal one, and that's everywhere in Minnesota where I am now. They are giving away their DMin degrees at their seminaries because they just want anyone to come. Anybody. So you can get a PhD from a Lutheran seminary today free because they've given up. What's different about them than people who don't go to church? Nothing. Nothing is different. And so people are simply stopped going. And everyone there has gray hair, like me.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's thank Dr. Breedon again.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I have two brief announcements to make. One is that somebody owns a red SUV, and the car is still running, with a license plate 65AH55. 65. License plate is 65AH55. If that might be yours, it's still running. You might want to go turn it off. The second and also very important announcement is we have a very special repast for today. We provide Lebanese food because we like it. There's plenty, nibble hard. I don't know that it would be a whole meal for all of us, but we do have meat pies and meat stuffed grape leaves, so rice and meat. Those two are meat items. We have spinach and cheese pies. Those are not vegan. But then we have spinach pies that are vegan, tabbouleh, hummus, baba ganoush, and please join us down the hall.
I'm not certain what the rest of you are going to eat. Just saying. So, by way of closing, I want to again thank Ali Cody for the extraordinary music that they've brought us today, I hope this is not the last time that they will join us. We will work hard to bring them back, and just so very grateful to you, Ali. Our colleague, Forest Church, says each of us, of course, must assume the responsibility for awakening. Others may be responsible for our being born, but what we make of our lives, how deeply and intensely we live, is our responsibility and ours alone. Having accepted life as a gift for ourselves, we are often charged to revere the presence of this same gift in others. May it be so. Let us join together in our closing hymn, number 1058, found in your teal hymnals. Rise in body or in spirit. Be ours a religion which like sunshine goes everywhere. It is temple of space, its shrine the good heart, its creed all truth. try that one more time? Be ours a religion which like sunshine goes everywhere. Its temple, all space, its shrine, the good heart, its creed of truth, its ritual works of love. Please be seated. Once again, beloved, worship in this place has come to an end, but our service continues. First with a wonderful piece of original music, then with an extraordinary repast and an opportunity for us to continue the conversation that Dr. Breedon invited us into so very well this day. I want to just ask, I don't know that there are any more announcements. I know that our crop walkers are going to begin. Early voting started yesterday and will continue. There will be early voting at our congregation here later this week. And a discussion in classroom 1 about the ballot and the questions that are on the ballot. So please get your food first and spread out wherever you need to be.